Oh man, I actually think, like, for my own self, the greatest fear I have is literally of a mob. And I had a chance a couple of times to see the mob in action when I was living in Africa. And one of the experiences I had is, if you see somebody there that's a thief and you point at them and you say, Mwezi, thief, then if other people start pointing and saying that too, they're going to grab that person and they're not going to hold a trial. They're going to kick and punch them to death. And when you see that, the veneer that you have over how we are civilized and how safe we are is now stripped away. And I don't think the Africans are bad or any less civilized than us, other than the fact that they don't have a police force that can met out justice. And so justice is immediate. And I think that one of the reasons that people in our culture right now are more comfortable with being a part of the mob is because they haven't seen what happens, the animalistic nature that comes, that once it begins, you can't stop it. There's no person on earth that can stand it. The only thing that can stop it is either that it burns out or that you bring so much force to bear on it that it has to dissipate. But either way, just allowing that mob to form is so dangerous as to be a thing that we don't, in our modern language, have a way to describe it, I don't think.
Right. I agree. You know, when we were kids, Vance, maybe in high school or younger, and they gave us a copy of William Golding's Lord of the Flies to read, the adventure part of the story took us in as young kids, and you enjoyed the idea that all these boys are on this island by themselves, and that by itself propels you into the story. But you get a little bit older and you realize, oh Lord, he's talking about partially about the mob and what happens with human psychology. And that's a classic example of the degeneracy of the mob and what goes on. So
I think
again,
it speaks to
history is
something
replete.
that's really important, that, like, we can end up taking for granted, that justice is actually a slow process, and that the virtue that comes from it, of course,
Yeah.
when something bad happens, we want to see, consequences immediately, but slowing everything down and making sure that a process is followed is what allows you to transcend that animal nature and apply wisdom to the situation. Which is why anytime you're talking about the justice system, we should all agree, let us do everything we can to ensure that the system is stable. Not that my side wins today, because eventually your side is going to win tomorrow. And if I set it up so the table is stacked, that's bad news over the long term.
Big A man, Vance, big A man. You know, it's like the U.S. is a bird, and a bird needs two wings in balance to fly. So you need your Democrats, Republicans, right, left. And like you said, if the Republicans win here in November or the Democrats win in November, that's going to flip at some point. So if you don't like what happens and you go out and try and punch your neighbor in the head or steal their sign, steal their Trump sign or Biden sign, what have you, don't be surprised when the same thing happens to you down the road. But that's, to me and you and to the listeners, that's common sense. But we all know there's a segment of society, apparently a large segment of society in the United States, to which that is not common sense. And as to how that's happened, managed to creep into our society over the last 50 years, my Lord, they'll be writing books on that a couple of 100 years from now. Tomes, no doubt, tomes. I guess, Vance, it comes down in the end to how you behave, right? We'll go right back to your little girl, how you behave in front of your daughter, what example you lead for her. And there was a guy a few years ago named David Hite. He was out in, boy, my memory's rough on this, Vance. He was out in Oregon, and he had a little farm, a lot of hay, I think some livestock. My computer's messing up. There we go. a lot of hay, livestock. He took it upon himself. His wife had a horse. The horse died, and he had to bury this horse. It was a beloved pet, part of the family, whatever description you want to use. The point was it was beloved. So it's quite a task to bury a horse, and if he wanted to do it right, maybe 10 feet deep, 8 feet long grave. Logistically, that's not so easy. So he began to realize that he had opportunity. And this David Hite guy bought himself a dually with the accompanying equipment. And as a ministry, right, not as really a money-making venture, but as a ministry, out there in Oregon, he decided that he would bury horses for people. Because most of the time, depends on where you're at in the U.S., but Vance, if your horse dies, you can call a zoo. They'll come get your horse, feed it to the animals. Or you might be able to call the refuse department. They'll drag your horse off, things like that. But if you love that horse, like for example, if a little girl had the horse from the time she was 12 and that horse lived for 25 years, right? There's connections there.
You don't want to really feed it to the lions.
Right. You want to bury it right. So he started doing this, man. Before he knew it, he had calls from all over the place. And he was going several hundred miles a time to get these horses. And he had all these construction straps. He would go into these stalls wherever the horse dropped out in the field, and he would reverently collect these horses, put them in a box on the back of the truck, and take them back to his own personal horse graveyard on his property, which was at the bottom of a canyon, huge field. And before he knew it, he had a couple of thousand horses buried there. So he would pre-dig the graves, bring the horses in, gently as he possibly could, deposit them into the holes, put some lime on top of the horses, cover the graves. And I think if I remember asking him, what else went into the grave, and I think he told me that sometimes the bridle will go in, depends on what the people request. And most of the time he kept the shoes. So he had all these shoes from these horses. But you can imagine, Vance, this huge pasture filled with these grave sites of these horses. And again, this guy was charging something like $250, $300 for the whole deal, which is a phenomenal price because he's done it so reverently as a ministry. I was deeply impressed by him because I quickly recognized that he was a better man than me. I simply wouldn't do that. I don't mean that to knock myself. I just recognized a man with a heart for serving others. And name is David Hite. You can look him up on Google. As far as I know, Vance, he's still burying horses. And when you first hear about it, it's just funny. And then when you look at the nuances of what's going on with his service, you really tip your hat.
Thanks for checking out this podcast short. If you like this interview, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button and hit that bell so you always get notified about this podcast. And if you're really interested in conversations like this, you may want to consider joining the Articulate Ventures Network. To find out more, go to network.articulate.ventures.